Study Bassers! In this lesson, I want to define some common beat terminology that you will often hear. Musicians use a lot of different words to describe different rhythmic points in a measure of music. And these terms, they can be confusing because a lot of people use them differently from their technical definition. Now, these terms apply to most meters, but we'll talk about them in the context of 4/4 time since you're already familiar and comfortable with it. To define some of the terms, I need to give you a quick primer on conducting. So you probably know that the conductor is the person who stands in front of the symphony waving their arms about. Now, many of you will not work with a conductor, but a little understanding of conducting will help you understand a lot of terminology about beats, meter, and rhythm. So it's worth knowing what Bugs Bunny was doing up there. Now, one role of the conductor is to act as a silent metronome for a large group of musicians. The motion of the conductor's hand or baton outlines the pulses of the meter. Each bounce of the hand or baton lands on a beat. Now in 4/4, the motion often goes like this. Now the most important part of the motion to know is where beat 1 falls. Beat 1 is always marked with a straight, decisive downstroke. So beat 1 lands at the bottom of the stroke. This brings us to our first musical term, the downbeat. So the downbeat is defined as beat 1 of the measure. And the term comes from conducting, and it refers to the downstroke defining beat 1 in the conducting pattern. Now, people use this term incorrectly all the time. A lot of people use it to mean every beat of the measure, 1, 2, 3, 4, instead of just beat 1. Now the correct term for that is on beat. And I think the confusion comes from a couple of places. First, people tap their feet down on the beat. Second, guitarists often pick or strum downstrokes on the beat. So both of these things lead people to call each beat a downbeat. But the true definition for a downbeat is beat 1 of the bar, and the term, again, comes from the conductor's downward stroke on beat 1. This brings us to our next term, the upbeat. Now, this one really gets used incorrectly all of the time, so I'm guilty of it too. I think every great teacher I've had has burned it into my brain the wrong way. Upbeat has two technical definitions. The first definition for upbeat is the notes preceding the first downbeat. And other common names for these notes are pickup or pickup notes or anacrusis. The second definition is the upbeat is simply the final beat of the measure. And again, these definitions, they come from the conductor's upstroke on the final beat leading to the downbeat stroke. That makes sense. Now, seemingly everyone uses this term upbeat to mean the ands between the beat. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now, again, I think this confusion is coming from people's foot tapping, where their foot is often up on the and down on the beat. And guitarists often use an upstroke on the and a downstroke on the beat. So the confusion really isn't surprising. But the true definition of upbeat is the final beat of the measure or the pickup notes leading into the first downbeat. Now you might not believe me, but just go look it up in a music dictionary and you'll be surprised. The correct term for the ands in a measure is the offbeats. But expect musicians to use the term upbeat to mean the ands quite often. And these incorrect uses are okay as long as everyone is in agreement. But if you're that person at parties who likes to butt in with actually, you now have a few more ways to spoil the conversation. Let's talk about another term that you'll hear quite often, the backbeat. So a big feature of 4/4 time in many styles of music like blues, jazz, R&B, and rock is the backbeat. The backbeat is the strong accent placed on beats 2 and 4. You can really hear the accent in early rhythm and blues and rock and roll. So if you listen to Chuck Berry's song Rock and Roll Music, In the lyrics, he even states, "It's got a backbeat, you can't lose it." And he's referring to the accent on 2 and 4. So here's an example of the backbeat in 4/4 time. So listen to the whack of the snare drum. That backbeat accent is constantly propelling and driving the music forward. Now, when the audience is into the music, they'll be clapping on the backbeat, on beats 2 and 4. Now, sometimes the audience will get this wrong and frustrate the band by clapping on 1 and 3. Please don't do this. Now, somewhere there's a funny video of Harry Connick Jr. turning around an audience that's clapping on the wrong beats 1 and 3 by sneaking in an extra beat. He turns them around to clap on 2 and 4. In the future, I'll explain how James Brown created funk by turning music around from the backbeat accent to the 1. As you know, the drums and bass work together to form the foundation and the groove of a song. So you might be wondering, if the backbeat is so essential, should my bassline accent it or stress it? Well, it's not a requirement or responsibility of the bass to accent the backbeat, but there's no rule against it either. So it always comes down to whether the groove works or not. So if you only accent the backbeat, it sounds a bit strange, don't you think? So you probably wouldn't do that all the way through a song. Traditionally, the bass has a lot more responsibility hitting on the grounding beats of 1 and 3. And this is for a couple of reasons. First, chords often change on beat 1 or on beats 1 and 3, and the bass helps define the chord changes in a song. Secondly, beats 1 and 3 are where the drummer often puts the kick or bass drum. The bass line and the bass drum are often tightly connected because they share the same acoustic space. Now, this is important. A basic rule when working with other instruments is the more the instruments occupy the same frequency range, the more tightly they need to work together. So the more separate the instruments are, like a bass and a flute, the more independent they can be. Now, acoustically, the bass guitar and the kick drum, the bass drum, occupy the same low frequency range, which is between 30 and 100 hertz. So your low E string, your open E string, is about 41 hertz. And the E an octave above is about 82 hertz. And a lot of bass lines sit in that bottom octave. So your low notes really need to lock in and connect with the kick drum. So if they fight each other down there, it's not going to groove. It's going to be muddy and ill-defined. So here's a bass line that doesn't work with the bass drum. And then here's a bass line working with the bass drum. So you can hear it's a lot clearer and tighter. Now the snare drum sits a bit higher than the kick drum, so it's often between 100 and 200 hertz. And this is where the common higher notes of the bass live. So open G, your open G string is 100 hertz, and the G on the 12th fret is about 200 hertz. So higher notes might try to be sensitive to the snare drum. Sometimes you use higher notes to reinforce the backbeat. So there are lots of bass lines and riffs that mimic that bass snare drum backbeat pattern. So if you listen to Immigrant Song by Led Zeppelin, you'll hear the whole band just hitting that backbeat really hard. And then another song that has an octave riff that imitates the bass snare backbeat pattern is My Sharona. So yes, a riff or a bass line can accent the backbeat. Now, Your bass line, though, could also obscure or distract from the backbeat. So sometimes if you play too high and too much around the backbeat, you can really weaken the groove that backbeat snare pattern creates. So one strategy is just to play low and stay out of the way of the backbeat. Other times in your bass line, you might hit the backbeat along with the snare drum. And other times you might give the drummer all of the backbeat by leaving a hole on 2 and 4. One of the hardest lessons to learn is when not to play. So when creating a bass line, you want to be sensitive to these relationships. You need to pay attention to what else is in that low range. And a lot of it's going to be intuitive and just feel right. But when things are going wrong, it gives you something to look at. Now, as you can imagine, this bass and bass drum relationship is a huge complex subject, and we'll cover it much more thoroughly in future lessons. Okay, this lesson covered a lot, so let's review. We briefly covered how conductors use their hand or baton to outline the pulse of the meter. Each bounce of their hand marks a pulse. The term downbeat refers to the first beat of the measure, and that comes from the conductor's downward stroke that highlights beat 1. The term upbeat is technically defined as the final beat of the measure or the pickup notes leading into the first downbeat. But many people use the term upbeat to mean the ands in between the beats. Now, the term meaning on each beat is onbeat, and the term for the ands is offbeats. But again, all of that gets very mixed up, so you just have to pay attention. The term backbeat refers to beats 2 and 4. Many styles accent the backbeat, and that really drives the music forward. So that accent often occurs in the drum part and not necessarily in the bass line. Lastly, I gave you an introduction to working with other instruments that share the same low frequency range as the bass. And one of the most important relationships is working with the drummer's bass drum. But we'll talk about these intricate relationships with other instruments much more in future lessons. Okay, StudyBassers, that's it for this lesson. Keep on learning.